welcome to this joint Geothermal Rising Pivot panel on focusing the foundation for energy security and innovation on geothermal technologies. My name is David Hart, and I want to thank Geothermal Rising and Pivot for hosting us. We've got a great panel, and I look forward to your questions coming in after we've talked a bit. The panel title focuses on this new foundation. I have to correct the title. We had hoped it would be established by now, but it was soon to be established. This is an organization that's going to have great potential to foster public-private partnerships, particularly for technology commercialization. But the foundation is just one tool for doing that. And as I've come to know a little bit about the geothermal industry, it seems to me that there is a need for lots of such partnerships. So the real purpose of our panel today is to try to get a better understanding of the need for public-private partnerships in this industry, the opportunities for them, and some of the barriers as well, and that's where the foundation might come in as a solution. As I said, my name is David Hart. I'm a professor at George Mason University, and I also work with a couple of think tanks, the ITIF, which is the title that's on the screen, as well as the Federation of American Scientists, which is leading the project on the FESI. And I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves so I don't mess up their titles, and maybe say a little bit about what your role is and your responsibilities and anything in your background that might help our audience understand where you're coming from on this topic. And I'll start with Jamie Beard, who is one of our hosts here, and thank you for hosting us.
Awesome, thank you, David. I'm Jamie Beard. I'm founder and executive director of a nonprofit called Project InnerSpace. InnerSpace is the organizer of the Pivot Conference, which this, of course, is part of, and is wholly focused on removing barriers that are standing in the way of the exponential growth and development of geothermal by the end of this decade. So my background, I'm actually a lawyer, reformed, turned geothermal fanatic for the last decade. So great to be here, David. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up is Sarah Jewett with Fervo.
Thank you so much. I am the Vice President of Strategy with Fervo Energy, where I have been for the last 3 years, since 2020. At Fervo, I sort of oversee a number of cross-functional initiatives, a little bit of a startup Swiss Army knife. But in my capacity as VP of Strategy, I oversee all of our policy and regulatory engagement. My background is actually in oil and gas on the technical side of things. Worked in the oil field for Schlumberger for a number of years, and also spent some time in corporate development for Select Energy Services.
Maybe just say a word about Fervo's business, since maybe not everybody is aware of what you do.
Sure. Fervo is a utility-scale geothermal power developer, and we're sort of taking the approach of applying proven technologies from the oil and gas industry to low permeability reservoirs to create power production. So we're in the category of enhanced geothermal systems.
Thanks. Lauren Boyd with the Department of Energy is next.
Hi, everyone. Lauren Boyd. I am a senior advisor at the U.S. Department of Energy's Geothermal Technologies Office. I am but a humble geologist, but have formerly served in basically running most of the technical programs in the office at one time or another, and the EGS program for the longest period of time, and acting director for about 10 years. So. Or for 2 years, pardon me. So a lot of experience in the DOE and grown to really love this community.
Great, thank you. Nathan Hartwig.
Hi, Nathan Hartwig with Biotech Corporation. It's artificial intelligence, machine learning startup that's focused on clean technologies. So first of all, happy to be here. I'm quite excited to see this panel form. As you think about FESI, it was actually a year ago that Mike suggested that I speak with David about this, and was speaking to him about geothermal specifically as we were reviewing what was coming out of CHIPS and Science Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law and IRA. There was this big kind of looming gap that was perhaps underrepresented, which was called geothermal. And I just saw FESI as this great opportunity to execute things outside, in the same mission with the DOE, but still outside of it, to pull in public-private cash to accelerate some of the things we're doing in geothermal. So happy to be here and look forward to saying more about the data and other things.
Great, thanks. And last but not least is Mike O'Connor with another part of DOE.
Yep. Hi, Mike O'Connor. I'm with the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, which is in the infrastructure side of DOE's renewable energy house. We are a office that was stood up in the bipartisan infrastructure law with a mandate to demonstrate first-of-a-kind commercial scale clean energy technologies, again, at scale and across the nation. Right now, we are pretty specifically appropriated to demonstrate technologies in hydrogen, carbon capture, long-duration energy storage, industrial decarbonization. We have a couple of place-based programs, but I am a part of the portfolio strategy team where we're thinking about longer term, right? That's our first tranche of demos. It's a nice tranche. It's $26 billion, but we're looking longer term because we know the problem is so much greater than that single slug of funds.
Great, thanks. So while I said that the panel isn't going to focus solely on the FESI, I thought I would provide a little bit of background on what it is and what it could be, and then we'll launch into some of these partnership opportunities. So as Nathan alluded to, FESI was authorized by Congress in the CHIPS and Science Act last year, and what that bill did was authorize the DOE to establish a nonprofit partner to work with it to advance its mission, and it's modeled on similar, what we came to call agency-affiliated foundations that exist for a number of federal agencies and also at the state level. And it's supposed to do things that are hard or impossible for the department to do, but which the department would really benefit from in terms of advancing its mission. And I think it also can be valuable to bring new ideas to the department as a voice for the industry, as a voice for the philanthropic community, and the voice for other outside organizations that have an interest in seeing geothermal and other energy technologies improve. So my interest in this is technology innovation, although the foundation can do lots of different things, but especially trying to get technologies across this famed commercialization valley of death, which I think has been a theme here at Geothermal Rising and probably elsewhere in Pivot. And so I am working with an organization, or really a loose coalition of organizations, what we have labeled the Friends of FESI. So just to be clear, I don't represent the DOE. But we would like the DOE to get this thing moving and really having an impact as soon as possible. One of our models for it was the Foundation for the NIH, which is the nation's leading biomedical research agency. And the Foundation for the NIH was set up in 1990, but it didn't actually get off the ground until 1995. And as I heard one of our colleagues from there speaking about this the other day, they spent about 5 years as the cookie and coffee, sort of backstop for NIH, which maybe it's hard for DOE to buy cookies and coffees, but I think there are more important things that we can do. So what the Friends of FESI are up to is trying to come up with exciting things for the FESI to do so it can get off the ground quickly. And we think there are a lot of opportunities in geothermal, and I have to say I'm sort of prospecting here, so you guys are out prospecting in the rest of the world, but I'm prospecting here at geothermal, and I've really hit gold. I've been excited to get such a positive response from the industry, from Jamie, from Lauren, from Nathan, and others here. So we had a workshop here on Monday. We kicked around a bunch of ideas, and this panel is, I hope, going to inform more people about the opportunity and maybe take the next step in kicking around some of those ideas. But as I said, FESI is just a tool. It's not an end in itself. If it helps partnerships form and move along, that's great, but there are lots of other ways to get partnerships going. And so if this panel produces some ideas that yield partnerships elsewhere, that's also a wonderful outcome. So to that end, let me start the conversation. I'm going to start with Jamie. And maybe you can talk a little bit about Project InnerSpace and particularly what it's doing in terms of data aggregation and open source data. This is one of the themes on Monday, and then I'll ask others on the panel to jump in.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, so one of the themes that seems like a really good target for this type of initiative that this type of initiative to really support are community assets. So problems right now in geothermal that are serving as barriers or obstacles ecosystem-wide that are expensive to solve and that are considered community assets. So no particular or one entity would necessarily be incentivized to fund and solve the problem. And there are a lot of technology problems that feel that way. High temperature electronics comes to mind as one of them. Everybody needs, nobody really wants to fund. And another is the need for a map of the world that shows where low-hanging fruit for geothermal development is. And so, one of the things that InnerSpace set out to do early on when we formed, there was plenty of energy and excitement in the philanthropic community to help overcome barriers in geothermal. And they were interested in funding some of these community projects. And so InnerSpace Phase 1 is focused on building a geothermal atlas of the world. We've recently announced a major technology partner. Last week we announced Google as our partner for that project. And Google's role in the atlas of the world, geothermal atlas of the world, is surface data. So we are working on the subsurface piece paired with a massive amount of surface data to produce a freely accessible global map, right, that would serve as a free public asset for geothermal prospecting, understanding where resources are, and understanding where development potential is. Right. So this is one of those types of projects that in its best form, will be immensely expensive. So InnerSpace has funded the first tranche of R&D projects with philanthropic capital, but we are a quarter of the way there on this massive project. The first continent actually announces this fall and goes public. So on a fast roll, but a long way to go. And these types of free community assets are something that a program like FESI could really help accelerate.
Yeah, and I think it could potentially sort of crowd in public capital. We often talk about the public investments crowding in private capital, but here this might be a way to get the public sector to think more as well. Nathan, you want to speak to the data question? We talked a bit about it on Monday.
Yeah, so on Monday we had a workshop which was highly attended and just a lot of really good engagement around it. And this concept of data, came up as one of the important themes, mainly, how to get data and how can it be helpful. And as we were talking about it, there's basically 3 themes that came out of that where we could directly use data today to improve things. The first was really around de-risking exploration. So I think Jamie perfectly alluded to how big data and looking at things in a different way can help everyone. But I think you can also get through this piece around looking at rigs, which I think others are going to talk about, and just looking at how can you do what was done for batch drilling on the exploration side, and bring that into some sort of a program to, drive efficiency. So you're not, paying for a one-off rig to mobilize one time, and all of a sudden, the costs are, 3x what you expected them to be. So I think there's a lot that we could do associated with data on the operational improvement side for exploration. And then I think the next piece is after a plant is up and running, oftentimes it's underperforming its nameplate capacity. And, sometimes there's geological factors that drive that, but sometimes there's operational improvements. Today we have very little understanding of what's happening at each of the wellbores as opposed to kind of the hub coming in, the manifold going into the plant, where you in essence see, all of your heat characterization right there in one spot, but don't necessarily understand if there is an underperforming well or if you have scaling issues or if there was, some sort of subsurface data that you missed earlier. So I think as we're applying data into operational improvement, that's a really good way to retrofit things that are existing and help them to, improve measurement and flow and optimize what they're doing. And then the third item is actually a bit, non-intuitive, which is applying data to look at permitting. If you were to say, how do we get more things happening fast, even with the perfect FID, you still may have, an environmental permit that's, going through a series of iterations because the person that's reviewing it may not have all of the information, or the person reviewing it may find one thing and then it kicks back and waits in the queue again. And I think there's ways, to provide additional services for the states that may be reviewing these, plus the federal that's reviewing, on federal lands, and a way to apply data into that piece to it. So happy to talk more about that as we get further.
Great, thanks. Anybody else on data?
I would love to weigh in if it's okay. I just want to underscore from the exploration side the brilliance of what Jamie and Google are doing, and not just from making data available, but I think from an awareness perspective, the idea of being able for anyone in the world to be able to look at a map that helps them understand through an accessible service like everyone understands and knows Google, what the heat resources are around the world in their country, in their state, depending on the resolution of it. I think that's extremely powerful. So not only can we advance the ability for developers to maybe narrow in on areas to further explore, and we've seen this in Department of Energy programs where collecting regional data sets that are more robust and making them available to the public have led to lease sales and led to successful development. So there's a real a track record of success in making that type of data available. But I think that power of awareness and connection to people is really important too, and quite brilliant.
I really like the idea of community asset. This is, I sort of wish that everyone had gotten a little window into my conversation with Mike yesterday about what our process is when we think about leasing geothermal acreage. And Fervo only likes to lease geothermal acreage with some information about the subsurface because it's really expensive and really high risk to go figure out what's underneath the subsurface, basically to create your own map. And Mike and his team were asking, well, how do you get information? And you either have some sort of well data that's on file, maybe you have a surface expression, maybe something else. But what's really interesting is, Mike and his team were saying, well, what form does the information take? And sometimes, we like to joke that some of it is like, handwritten on a note in a manila folder in the basement of University of Utah, and you have to go find it. So I think it's actually a really interesting treasure map exercise that the more different groups we can have working on it and taking innovative approaches to collecting and sharing data, the better the industry is going to be as a whole.
Yeah, I also love that theme of community projects. It's really about collective action. And as industries mature, they develop institutions that allow them to overcome collective action problems that are normal in business. And trade associations like Geothermal Rising, Project InnerSpace, and FESI, I think, are all potential mechanisms for that.
Yeah. I do want to throw out just on this data conversation, which I agree. I love treasure maps, but like pirates actually don't have that high of a track record of like replicability and deployment. I think one of the things we've heard on the S3 side of the shop, so the infrastructure side of the shop at DOE, which is not actually technology specific, it's really a tech agnostic aggregator of a lot of different ideas coming towards us. Jamie, your idea to talking with Google on a geothermal map is the exact conversation that our fossil energy and carbon management office has with us in talking about carbon storage, right? And getting some sort of similar understanding of where those reservoirs are. And it's not necessarily for our oil and gas majors. It's for the mayor of Tampa, who might need somewhere to put the carbon that they want to do the CCUS plant on their power plant. It might be for some sort of industrial off-taker, right? There is a massive expansion, like immediately, of the number of people who need to know about the subsurface that have no background or knowledge. So we don't all need to be a cartographer to be able to get to the bar. You just use Google Maps. We all should have that kind of same accessibility in subsurface.
Great, thanks. So if I can just drive this metaphor into the ground, I feel like data is definitely the richest vein of opportunity, but there are some others. So let's turn to one of those, and I'm going to ask Lauren to talk a little bit about pilot wells, which I take it are one of the riskiest aspects of the geothermal business.
Yes. So those of you who are familiar with the hydrothermal exploration, the risk curve for developing projects is pretty challenging. And we have some developers here who can talk about it. Sarah can describe what the challenges of not knowing exactly what your resource might be before you're able to successfully develop a project, and the sunk cost that goes into actually confirming your resource through drilling, which is in some cases and most cases the only way to confirm a hydrothermal resource. The amount of money that one has to spend to do that. So we've thought a lot about this at the Department of Energy, and historically had a number of programs far before my time, starting in the 70s, a program for loan guarantees, in the 90s and the 2000s, some cost share drilling programs. And those programs were directly correlated with successful discovery of resources and then successful plant developments that are now, make up the majority of the 3.7 or so gigawatts that are online in the United States. But recognizing that, so not only were they helping to actually find resources, but reducing that risk for operators to actually be able to get out there and learn by doing while drilling, which is something that we're focused, very heavily on in the Department of Energy right now. We can be more successful if we can drill more wells, be more efficient in our drilling of wells if we can drill more wells. So the idea of a pilot program is something I think that, in terms of fitting this into community benefit is a little more challenging from the FESI perspective, because obviously drilling wells will benefit an operator, but an idea to make it more beneficial to the community is this idea of data sharing, and something that was done during the GRED program that I mentioned that went from 2000 to 2007. All data that was collected from these projects were required to be publicly available. And those reports are still available in paper, as you said. I think we threw some of them out recently in our move, when we moved offices at DOE, but they're online as well. And anyway, so this idea of not only helping to de-risk the process for developers across the board from, we heard in our workshop earlier this week, maybe we don't just focus on hydrothermal. People were really interested in focusing direct use all the way up to super hot. So what could we do to help allow more wells to be put on, to be drilled, reduce the learning curve or advance the learning curve, and then get data out to the public to then potentially flesh out and make the mapping projects that Project InnerSpace and partners are doing more robust.
Thanks. Yeah. Anybody else on this topic?
A small amount of information from a pilot well can be massively impactful to de-risking an entire project. And so it is a really interesting space because it's highly capital intensive, it's high risk, but then when it's successful, it really can go a long way. I mean, a very unique example is Fervo has sort of cuddled up next to Utah Forge project funded by the Department of Energy because we know more about the reservoir there because of what Forge has drilled and the information that they've shared. And that is really meaningful for us because if we didn't have that, we'd have to go drill some of these wells. And so it's a really, I think part of the reason it fits so well in this conversation of, FESI and collaboration is that it is a really, really hard problem to solve that has a really meaningful impact if, the data can be shared from pilot wells.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's really important to be creative about how the public gets a payoff. So as you said, it could be through the data. It could be that it unlocks, and you guys can tell me from your experience, maybe it doesn't unlock just a single opportunity, but unlocks some larger geography.
Yeah, and I would say, I'm sorry, I feel like I have to lean so far forward because of these bat chairs that it's very hard to see you all.
We are the pashas of,
Captain.
of the Tuscany room here.
But, we hear this from states. We hear this from on the Hill, or, folks that are representing states. We hear it from some state geologists, from folks that are trying to develop in states and are, passionate advocates for geothermal that there isn't enough data to know necessarily where the resources are. So a program and we've historically done a little bit of this as well, even drilling, thermal gradient wells or slim holes, if we're not talking about, full-size wells, we would love to help facilitate. I think it would behoove the industry to help facilitate the drilling of injection and production wells as well, and cost sharing that. But there's quite a bit of data to be had in drilling, small diameter wells as well, in my opinion. But I'd love the other folks on the panel's opinion on that and the audience.
Well, I don't think this is necessarily a part of the what you could drill. I agree. I think a big tent, it would be really fascinating to see what would be covered in that program. But the benefits you were talking about, the community benefits, if we're talking about just an equitable transition to a clean energy workforce, drilling is a job-intensive industry, right? This is jobs that we're talking about that would be constant across the nation, and this would be direct creation of jobs by government action, basically, or public-private partnerships. We in the Office of Clean Energy Demos, and for any infrastructure law funded program, require our applicants to fill out a community benefits plan, that one of the 4 sections is job quality and equity, right? And I'll tell you, it is pretty difficult for a solar farm to defend their job quality and equity in these kinds of programs, right? You need 1/4 of one employee once a month to mow the lawn and clean the panels, and that's the situation. This is a job creator, and that could be really leveraged.
Thanks. Maybe we'll stick with workforce a little bit. That seems like, we didn't go into this in too much depth on Monday, but it does seem to me like an area, one, where the geothermal industry has needs and growing needs. And there has been, I think, a lot of philanthropic interest. And so, you know, how do we align those with what the DOE is trying to accomplish? As you mentioned, it's part of its mission at the moment, and there are some new units within the DOE that are specifically focused on this. But what kind of needs does the industry have for workers? Like, what's in shortage, or what is expected to be in shortage as we look forward? What do you have trouble hiring for?
I mean, well, so I can only speak to what startups are telling InnerSpace that we're working with, and I think this is a really funky, interesting problem, because there are plenty of workers who know how to do this work in the oil and gas industry, and they tend to be regional, meaning they are where the oil and gas is being drilled. But you have startups that are functioning in, for instance, direct use heating and cooling for residential and commercial buildings. That is not where the oil and gas is typically. That's just near cities in, you know, any state. And they've got massive months-long, if not years-long, waiting lists for projects. The only reason they have waiting lists is because they can't find enough workers to drill their wells. And this is the most interesting problem that is totally solvable if we think about it from maybe not a transition, a worker transition angle, but from a how do we engage the oil and gas industry angle, right? Because that's where the workers are. But so that's a little anecdotal, but it's one that for startups that InnerSpace works with, it is a really consistent narrative now, and becoming more consistent, which is, we can't hire the people we need, and we can't scale because of that. And it's really interesting, because there are a whole lot of people that have these skills. They're just in the oil and gas industry, right? So how do we engage that industry in a way that can contribute?
Yeah, I would also just add that and maybe you all can speak to this too, but we see a lot of, and we see here at this conference, an incredible number of highly capable, well-educated geoscientists, engineers coming into the geothermal industry. It's incredibly exciting. I think that, though, there are a lot more people that want to work in the geothermal industry than there are jobs in the geothermal industry. So I think in some cases, not to say that a cost-share drilling program or a pilot well drilling program is going to solve that problem, but some way to help jumpstart an industry for all of those people who have the interest and have the skill sets. Jamie's point is spot on. There's just this, it's a one-to-one from oil and gas, but we have, you know, so many people that are in petroleum engineering programs right now that are really interested in geothermal instead of oil and gas. We have folks in environmental science and now in marketing and communications that are interested in telling this story, and we need places for them to go. So I think that, and I'd love to hear perspectives of folks in industry, how you feel about that too, but that's my perception from the DOE side, is it would be wonderful to help jumpstart a market for them to go into.
Yeah, I'll just jump quickly on this. So, you know, last week when I was with my last company, Schlumberger SLB, we had, you know, roughly over 100 people in the new energy team, and we had 99,900 that were not in the new energy team. And every week we got 5 to 10 requests from friends of friends that wanted to move from one side to the other. You know, and it wasn't that there wasn't innovation happening within the hydrocarbon space. That's not true. There's a lot of digital technology that's moving forward. You know, there's a lot of things that are happening related to, you know, high temperature, high pressure, and, you know, putting on, you know, more information down hole, and, you know, how do you kind of make real-time decisions. But I think the kind of the draw is to understand how can somebody make a difference for the next 100 years. And, you know, I think a lot of that is, you know, this generation really focused on, you know, what can they do that's very important today. And yes, it's very important to keep the lights on through kind of traditional resources as well, with the eye towards how do we decarbonize those resources. And then we leverage the knowledge that we have within the oil and gas space to then, you know, do things like geothermal. So.
Yeah, it seems to me that this may be an area, if there's any philanthropists out there listening, where a little push could, produce some really big benefits for the full community. All right, so one other theme that we talked about, I'm going to ask Mike to kick us off on that, is offtake as a kind of industry-wide challenge and something where FESI might play a useful role.
Yeah, so we had a discussion in the Monday workshop on how we could potentially use FESI to help geothermal contracts be signed, basically that were at the appropriate value of clean firm power, right? And so one of the things that you consistently hear about geothermal energy is that it is costlier to produce, but it is also more valuable because it is always on and it's able to be ramped up, ramped down as needed, can provide energy storage, grid benefits, those sorts of things that's not necessarily monetized in all contracts. So we talked a lot about the opportunity for FESI to help ink deals that are sort of time matching, like 24/7 time matching of renewable energy credits, so that it's not just a bulk credit that you're cashing in on that wind or solar might be able to meet, but it's the actual minute-to-minute credit that you need to demonstrate the value of clean firm power. But we also talked a little bit about the differences between maybe potentially this industry, which is selling electrons, which there is a market for right now, right? And potentially like a hydrogen industry where this idea sort of spawned out of the Department of Energy's recent announcement to spend $1 billion of its $8 billion of hydrogen hub funding on demand-side procurement mechanisms. They're going to basically be buying hydrogen to jumpstart the other side of that economy. We talked about how geothermal doesn't have that problem, right? We are selling a product that people need already. So some of the things that FESI can do, in absent of needing to really pull demand along, right, those time variable RECs, but also making sure that when the demand is there and the supply is there is a quick transaction, right? So FESI as a quasi-governmental or non-governmental entity that works with the government could be a valuable asset to try and just supply personnel to places where there are bottlenecks, i.e. permitting. Right? This is a place where you could maybe produce fellowships that would go to those agencies that are those regional offices of BLM that are so strapped for personnel that would be able to interact, maybe not directly, maybe not a direct fellowship, but from their perch be able to talk across the agencies in a way that honestly us at DOE have trouble doing. People at the Department of the Interior have trouble doing. Leveraging that kind of capability, because the demand side, right, offtake is being hampered by the fact that this geothermal project might not feel real because the permitting for horizon for this thing might be 15 years long.
I have a different but complementary perspective on this, which is as entities are figuring out how to do geothermal projects in new places, it seems to me the trend is shifting away from federal land because of the permitting problems and because it's a lot of a political nightmare to fix, one that will take a while. So there is a lot of momentum in states and and traditional oil and gas states, which I love because they have the workforce. This is where I see the problem, though, and I don't have a solution on how FESI could play here. So maybe this is a brainstorm for later. There seems to be a lot of traction amongst technology companies to think about advanced market commitments, particularly for clean, firm power. Mm-hmm. And momentum is building so much that I feel like we may be on the cusp of some very big movement in that field. If you look at existing structures that were really groundbreaking, like Frontier Climate, so that was the STRIPE initiative that turned into a major billion-dollar advanced market commitment for carbon removal. The pain point in that type of demand pull or market signal approach, and I think for geothermal this will be extra hard, is that when you start trying to launch first-of-a-kind projects with an advanced market commitment, there is a lack of capital for pilots. And so you have a market signal that is really strong, and you have no capital to deploy these projects, particularly if they're first of a kinds. And so for carbon removal, my guess is that's hindered frontier climate, right? Because they're trying to figure out how to align this massive, strong market signal and the funding behind it with the fact that they're deploying new technologies and first of a kinds, and there's a huge funding gap. Geothermal has got that funding gap big time, big time. And so and we're on the cusp again of some market signals for geothermal without the pilot funding. And so I think, that brings back to maybe there's something here where, there's a major valley of death for first of a kind. Maybe there's a role there, and that kind of relates to the offtake piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, so FESI could play, I imagine, a couple of roles. One is just sort of convening around a topic like this where it might be difficult or uncomfortable for DOE to do it because of what Congress has written into its specific authorization. But we do actually have an office that does clean energy demonstration and is not at the moment funded for geothermal. But if philanthropic capital proves the principle, then that becomes hopefully a springboard for Congress to get its act together and start giving Mike's office some money to do this.
There is nothing that says we can't have that appropriation in the future.
Yeah, great. So we're about ready to open up to audience questions. So I will alert you to get your ideas ready, and we have about 20 minutes left in the session. But the last theme I just want to raise for the panel is what I heard on Monday a little bit was the impenetrability of DOE and the challenge of understanding what DOE is up to, and maybe it would be useful to have kind of an inbox or a place to go. And I don't know that FESI can do that for the entire department, right? So geothermal is just one piece of a much larger picture. But I did want to hear a little bit from our private sector participants here about the challenges in working with DOE. We've showered praise on it, and we should. It's a very important department, but it's not without its flaws. So maybe you might speak, either Nathan or Sarah, to that.
Sure, yeah. I hate to sort of turn the question around, but that has not been our experience with Department of Energy, that it's been impenetrable. I think, I started working in policy only 3 years ago when I joined Fervo, and so I don't have a ton of past experience. I don't have any other, experience to go off of, but what I have found is that these guys to my left here have been incredibly willing to pick up the phone, talk about what we are doing, talk about what we need, and I think that that's actually been true across the entire Department of Energy, at least under this administration. I think that they are working incredibly hard to deploy a massive amount of capital, and they don't always necessarily get it right, but I would say they're trying really incredibly hard, and they've been hugely collaborative with us and have been an incredible, incredible partner. I also think that they can be the whipping boy for Congress. Congress is messing up some of this stuff, and then the DOE gets blamed for it. So I would just like to also put that into the universe that, lack of funding is not necessarily their fault. They're trying to do the best they can with what they've got, and so I don't really have anything critical to say here.
Very, very polite.
Yes,
yeah, it's just because I'm
polite.
sitting next to Lauren.
All right, Nathan.
Otherwise,
let us have it.
Not
I'm
be saying
surrounded
that.
by DOE. So in terms of accessibility, I 100% agree. So, I had the pleasure to join the Geothermal Earthshot in Houston and speak with several people, at that, including Secretary Granholm. And we met Dr. Jerry Richmond at that meeting and told her a little bit about what New Energy was doing, on hydrogen, lithium, and CCS, and energy storage and critical minerals. And she was fascinated by it. But, our company had not done a good job of reaching out to inform others what we were working on. And so we were invited by Dr. Jerry Richmond to come spend 9 hours in Forrestal, and we brought our whole team. And it was our PhD chemist, their PhD chemist. Our person working on critical mineral separation, the critical mineral team, their hydrogen team, our hydrogen team, and it was fantastic. So I agree 100%. This transparency of having open discussions, you just have to call and find the right way to to make that a relevant topic. So listening for sure is there. Flipping the hat, so now at Biotech, Clean Startup is now saying, how can we engage with the Department of Energy further? And that's where the small business, SBIR, is out there, and it's just amazing the amount of resources that are provided for people that are trying to do something that's aligned with the objectives of the DOE. That is, by the way, a burdensome process, not because of the DOE, but just because that is the process. And so there's a lot that goes into those things in terms of complexity and some of the challenges associated. But I agree 100%, the willingness to engage and to support the private sector in trying to accelerate things aligned with the DOE's mission is quite remarkable.
Okay, so let's open it up. Let me see if there are either questions in the room or we have a channel to our online audience. If you're in the room, I'm just going to have you shout the question and I will repeat it for everybody else. So we're a little limited on the technology here. Yep, let me, over here. So the question is how FESI might play a role in strengthening industry's understanding of characterization. And maybe I'll throw it to somebody who knows more about geothermal so I don't butcher the question any further.
I mean, I guess I would say that on the data piece, one idea, and Jamie, you can tell me if this is within your scope, but something we've talked about internally and thought about is what could someone like Google do to drag all the data from the state oil and gas agencies and the state geologists, any subsurface data that exists, maybe it's local community data, whatever data might be there about the subsurface that could then be brought into, rather than just a heat map, but more comprehensive subsurface data. That never takes the place of an actual hole in the ground, of course, but I think that's getting us to a much better place than we ever have been. So that, as a dream, if that could happen and then be supplemented by, actual drilling around the country that was supported by some sort of collaborative public-private partnership, I think that's a pretty impressive way to meet a lot of people's needs. States who want to know about their resources and better explore, reducing risk for developers, helping to create a workforce, or at least stand one up for a short period of time that hopefully could be ramped off into industry's hands, and then also working on that learning curve to make us more efficient and better at drilling. But I don't disagree. I think got to get into the subsurface in order to be able to really get better at manipulating it and working in it.
I think that Lauren, you're exactly right. Like, that's the first level characterization that we're talking about. And it's the answer to, Tara, the answer to your question, I think, is directly related to how much capital FESI has, right? If this becomes a big deal, I could imagine a world where, DOE is able to, or FESI is able to run some sort of merit-based competition on locations that have potential in different locations, right? There are proposals for places where we think there might be high potential, and we do some sort of merit review. Tying it back to the last question, where thank you for all the praise for DOE, I'm not sure we deserve it all, because we don't talk to each other as much as we should, right? And there are place-based programs at the Department of Energy that are begging for clean, firm power to offtake their industrial decarbonization hub or their direct air capture hub or their hydrogen hub or something to that extent. And I could imagine a place where there's a competition that is considering other uses of power as a reason to go and explore in a particular location, right? Having the Department of Energy's understanding of its full portfolio. That's all, I think, well in the future and depends on enough capital to run a competition that would be valuable. You get more than one hole out of that sort of thing. I'm not sure what would be a more near-term urgent priority to do that like wide surface level characterization or to dig deep on things. I think both are critically important, and it depends on what the board wants when the board is set up and how much they get.
Yeah, I was going to say the funder will call the tune ultimately in addition to the board. Why don't we go to one of the online questions?
There's a few that are on. If you could just talk a little bit more about the institution of FESI. I think people are asking about how it will be funded, how DOE will be involved, what the actual gap in services is that FESI would be filling.
Yeah, so I guess that's to me. So the question was, say a little bit more about FESI, how it's going to work. Much of it is still TBD. The first step that has to be taken is that the Secretary of Energy will appoint the initial board. And that's a step that we as Friends of FESI are waiting for. The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine has to play a role in that. So they are working with the Department of Energy to identify candidates. So those of you who have great candidates for the board, please let us know, at least as first remove, and we can be a channel. So these are people that need to know something about the public sector, something about the private sector, and something about the philanthropic sector. And the legislation that authorizes FESI lays out a number of criteria so that the board is representative. But it's also got to be a board that can raise money. And so we want to make sure that that it has that capability, because most of the funding for FESI, we believe, will come from private and philanthropic sources and leverage. I see it as a way for the rest of the world to help DOE, set new priorities, pilot projects that the DOE could take up and grow as the voice of the community. Now, there are other federal foundations, federally affiliated foundations that operate on different models. There's one that works with the U.S. Department of Agriculture that is primarily funded through the Farm Bill. But I think the NIH model is better. That's mostly funded by the private sector and philanthropy. And of course, there's a lot of philanthropists interested in medical research, so they have an advantage. But like the DOE, there's a tremendous technical capability in that agency. And there's a real interest in the outside in creating those partnerships. And just to give you a little bit of inspiration, at a recent presentation, I heard a representative of the Foundation for the NIH share that they have 7 different consortia that are in the 100 million or more, up to $1 billion. So it's a big operation, not relative to all of NIH, but on key issues that industry cares about, that philanthropy cares about, where they're willing to put up part of the money, then they can leverage some of that NIH money.
David, can I add something to?
Please do.
From my perspective? So I just wanted to share, as a representative of the Geothermal Technologies Office, we have historically been the largest funder of geothermal RD&D in the world. That's changing. Europe is putting quite a bit of money into incentivizing geothermal projects, but our appropriations are $118 million a year. We are the only office within the Department of Energy, except for the loan program, that is currently funding geothermal work. So there's a lot of potential in Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. We have amazing partnerships. I would argue with Mike that we have a great relationship. But we also have staffing problems, that there are all these new provisions that come out through bill, and we don't necessarily have enough people in our office. We're managing, massive new innovative projects, but trying to educate the rest of the department, who, as historically the smallest renewable program, that is now getting interest and enjoying attention from secretarial level and from the Hill that we've never before seen. There are a lot of folks that don't know what geothermal is, and we're doing our best to try to educate folks and take advantage of those incredible funding opportunities as well, but we're short-staffed. But the point of my point is just to say that FESI creates this incredible opportunity to leverage the work that we have historically been doing since the 80s in the Geothermal Technologies Office, and now funded at like a reasonable, level where we're able to accomplish quite a bit in the last 15 years, with this opportunity to, with private sector funding, and to leverage that opportunity to bring new ideas in, to be nimble, and to work in a way that our organization can't normally, I think is incredibly attractive and can create some amazing new opportunities for innovation and progress in the industry. So just wanted to share my perspective as a...
Thanks, yeah, and we are really excited that there are parts of DOE that are thrilled about this opportunity and see it, because we need partners inside and outside.
A note on nimbleness, just for, the sake of transparency, I'm in the portfolio strategy office, and the most near-term year that I'm thinking about helping portfolio manage is fiscal year 2028. So I bet you private capital can move faster than that.
Yeah, I think so. I think we might have had one or two more questions in the room, and then we're going to wrap up. Over here, yeah, I think. Thanks. Yeah, so the question is, how can FESI complement what DOE is doing and not substitute for it? I think this is a crucial thing. It is specified in the law that it is its role, and it's up to the board, I think, to be vigilant about that. But I also think it's going to be up to the donors to make clear that their money is to leverage, what DOE is doing and amplify what DOE is doing, because it would be a failure, I think, if FESI is cutting into anything that's already going on. It shouldn't be a substitute. It should be augmenting. And I think that's going to be, about program design, about DOE being clear, about what it's doing. And I kind of see them kind of operating in parallel, but separately. So one of the key things about FESI is we don't want all the regulatory burdens to pass through, from DOE to it. So I don't know that they'll be operating jointly quite, but they should be kind of operating in parallel and coordinating. And there are some seats on the board that are assigned to DOE, so there are 4 seats on the board in an ex officio manner, so that should help them coordinate. But I think it's ultimately about the donors and the board being very vigilant about that concern, because I think it is a real concern, and it would be a tragedy if it becomes a competitor or a substitute. I agree with that point.
If I could add, I think that is an excellent point, and I want to build on it a little bit to say that I think my number one concern watching this get traction over the past year is that InnerSpace was funded by fast movers that were really excited about doing really bold, innovative things fast. And I love all the DOE colleagues in this room. This is not a comment about you all. I know you want to go fast and you try to go fast, but the government is slow, right? Not only that, but not hugely innovative. That's not their job. It's not their job to go out and make really big, high-risk bets unless you're ARPA-E, right? And so, InnerSpace was kind of an avenue for some of that capital to be like, okay, well then here, go, you do it. Right? And so as long as we can keep eyes on the ball there, where we don't divert capital that's wanting to be big and bold and fast into kind of what David said, which is the slower and more burdened regulatory structures of the government, right? So there's a reality there, I think, that needs to be really aggressively managed.
Here, we'll take one more in the room. So the question is whether there is a sort of strategy document for FESI yet. And we've, as the Friends of FESI, put out various papers with some ideas. And as I said, we're trying to develop both use cases and projects for FESI to look at. But we don't speak on its behalf. It doesn't exist yet. The Office of Technology Transitions within the department is the lead entity. And then the secretary is responsible for appointing the board. So there was a workshop that they held at the ARPA-E Summit that also, similar to what we've done here, but on a much broader scale, tried to articulate some of the ideas. There was an RFI. We're still waiting for them to put out the results of that RFI. So I would say OTT is kind of your entry point, and to keep an eye on that. But I think until it exists, it can't it can't have a strategic plan of its own, unfortunately. So we're pressing them and working through our allies in Congress to try to encourage the department to keep moving forward on this. They have an awful lot to do. This, again, I'm not critiquing the department here. They were saddled with, or they were given this opportunity to spend a huge amount of money with not many more people. So I'm very cognizant that they have a lot to do, and you know, the end of the administration is looming for them. But at this point, the national academies will be, I think, soliciting board nominations soon, and hopefully the OTT will be putting out the results of that RFI, and that'll give some sense of what the community is looking for. So one last question, and then we're going to wrap up.
Thanks. This was incredibly helpful. So you spoke a little bit about the role of philanthropies, private companies, and the government that will play into FESI. And I'm curious what the role of an NGO could be in either supporting or engaging with FESI.
So the question is, what's the role of NGOs in engaging with and supporting FESI? Certainly we're, as a coalition of Friends of FESI, we're looking for partners. We would love more organizations to develop projects. We would love to have a whole book full of projects to give to the board when they meet, or maybe the second time that they meet, that are, you know, vetted. We've talked about it with industry constituents. We've talked about it with philanthropy. We have some potential funders out there. So, you know, we'd love to talk with NGOs that are interested in doing that. We have a kind of rough template of the sort of thing that we might share with the board. But it has to have an anchor in the department, I think. It has to have an anchor outside the department. And it has to be something tractable. So this is a brand new organization. I don't think we'll be doing $1 billion offtake right away. We can aspire to that. But we need to get this thing off the ground with, you know, things that are obviously, you know, needed, that overcome barriers, and that have real potential to be successful. Maybe that's a great stopping point. So let me thank you all for joining us. Thank you online. Thank you, Geothermal Rising and Pivot. And with that, we will sign off.